And hello everyone, welcome back to another Love2D tutorial. So if you haven't seen the previous video, I do recommend you do because we have implemented the basics of the enemy. Currently the enemy doesn't really do anything, it just kind of follows you and then boop, end. So yeah, we have done that. If you haven't seen that tutorial, I do recommend you do because we'll be building off from that tutorial. Alright, so first we want to go to the main.lua file, this main one right here, and we want to make this true because today we're going to be working on the menu. So we want to be able to see the menu by going here to true. This shouldn't do much except for resizing your cursor, so make sure it does. Now we're going to create another table here called local buttons, and these buttons will basically contain all of the buttons for all of our different states. So menu underscore state will then become an empty table. Cool. So now that we have that, let's go here to the side and just create a new file. I'm going to call this button.lua. It's going to be a button class. And this button class will basically contain all of the things we'll need for buttons. So local love, which is optional, but I love doing this. Require, and then we can just say love. Then you can create a function called button. And yeah, simple as that. Now we want quite a few things. We're not going to mess around with too many things just yet. But I can tell you from the bat, our button will probably have text on it. And we probably want to set the text when we create the button. So something like text. And we also need to be able to execute a function. So func, because when we click the button, it should be able to do something. And this func we pass in is what it should be able to do. This method isn't too great. I don't love it that much, but it does get the job done, and that's what we want at this moment. We also want to be able to pass an optional parameter into the function. So we can include func param. And then we want to include the width and then the height of the button. Okay, so next we can just say return, and it's going to return a table. This table is going to return will contain width, and that's going to be either the width passed in or 100 by default. And then we want a height, which will be the same thing. So like that. So either the height passed in or 100. Then we're going to create a function, and this function will be equal to the function passed in, to func passed in, or to a function that doesn't do much. It's just an anonymous function. It's not going to do anything really. It's just going to print this button has no function attached. As simple as that. If you wanted to, you can even make it shorter and make it one line like that. It's optional, you can make it more than one line. I kind of like it as one line because it just does a quick one-liner. And then the function parameter will be the function parameter passed in. If there's no function parameter passed in, it will be nil and no parameter will be passed in. And then the text will be equal to text or no text. Then the button's X position will be equal to 0. The button Y position will be equal to 0. And then the text on the button should be at position 0, and then the text Y of the button should be at position 0 as well. Okay, so this is a lot of things we're just setting by default. You don't have to worry too much about it. And then of course we want to return the button down here before I forget, because I'm going to forget if I did it now. Cool. Now we are going to do things like making the button clickable and whatnot, but first we want to be able to draw the button. That's the most important part right now, because we need to kind of get the button just on to see that it works. So let's create a draw function for the button, which will be a function, and this function takes in self, and then the button's X position, the button's Y position, and in the text X and the text Y position. Now, I might be putting it here, like the button X, Y, text X, and text Y might be able to be passed in from here. So these 4 attributes. But if you wanted to, you could pass them in here. The reason I'm doing this is if you ever later want to animate the button, so the button moves from one position to another position, then you can do it from here. You can, when you draw it, you can just move the button X and Y positions as you please, instead of having the X and Y positions kind of set as soon as you create the button. This is personal preference. I like doing this. You don't have to do this. You can put all of this. You can put it in here. There's no problem with that. I just want to do it here. And this also keeps this from kind of cluttering up and having 50,000 freaking things it needs to take in, because now it's being split into 2. Cool. Now here we want to say self.button X, and of course you could have made this a table as well, but we're already in a table, so having another table within a table is just, personal preference yet again. And that can be equal to button X, so this button X right here, or self.button X. So this button X here or this button X here, one of these two. Self.button X is referring to this button X. Don't get too confused here. So just as I said, you could put the button X and the Y up here as well, and it will be set here as well. Anyhow, and we can just copy that and do the same for Y. So self.button Y, like that. Then here we can basically set the text position. So if text X, so if the text does exist, the X position of the text, which is passed in here, then we can say self.text at position X is equal to text at position X plus self.button X. Else self.textX is equal to self.buttonX. Now you could have done this yet again in one line, where you basically check if this exists, and if it does exist, you do your things. You could have done it like this, but I find it to be a lot less confusing and just so much easier to also understand if you're reading it, if you do it like this, where if it's text X, do all of this, otherwise do this. Instead of using this OR way here, which could work, but I'd rather not, because that's going to be prone to bugs, because I'm not too good at reading that. And in here we can of course just go text Y, and in here we can say button at Y, like that. Now here we're just saying the text on the button. So this is the text that exists on the button. If the X exists, so if this X position is being passed in for it, then make the original one here, make it equal to what is passed in plus the button X. We're saying the button X here because the button may be 30 pixels to the right, but the text isn't just going to be placed onto the button automatically. So we'll need to tell the text add that X. So we're going to have our button X, and then we're going to need to add to it. That's this here. I'll show you how this works in a second once we actually draw this to the screen, just so you can kind of get an idea. Now take note, this bottom order I'm going to do here is very important. So love.graphics.setColor, and you can pass in your own color, the color you want for every single button. But in this game, I'm just going to keep all of the buttons the same color. 0.6, 0.6, 0.6. It's going to be a light-ish color. Then we want to draw the button. So love.graphics.rectangle. And if you're still a little bit touchy on this right here, don't worry, I am going to explain it. I just want to kind of give you something you can visualize when I explain it. And we can just say fill it, because we want to fill it so we don't see the background color of the game. And then self.buttonx, position at x, self.button y, self.width, and it's self.height. So this is where the button is going to be drawn to and how it's going to be drawn. Okay, so that's for the button. We can do that. Now we need to do the text, because remember, the text isn't really part of the button. It's its own thing. So we need to do it here as well. So love.graphics.set color, and we're going to make it equal to black. Now you can make it a different color, but I feel like this color works perfectly with this lightish grayish color. Then we want to love.graphics.print, and we want to print self.text, self.text, and then self.text at position X, and then self.text at position Y. Take note, I'm using self everywhere because we want to, on the end of the day, use this everywhere in our code. This will just make things so much easier. So whatever you do, do not change these values here or any values you set in here. Try and keep it as much as possible to these global-ish values we have here, because believe me, it's going to solve a lot of problems later. And then we just want to reset. This is optional, you can do it somewhere else, but I'm going to reset the color here to be white. So that's going to be my always fallback default color. It's going to be pure white. Okay, we have created the button, and the button can now be drawn. Now here we want to basically create the 3 buttons for our game. I'm going to create just one button for now. And here we have our menu state button. So we want to create it on here. So in the load, we are going to go here. So here with the onload, I'm going to create a button, or go to our buttons, say dot menu state, and then I'm going to add a play game button. Now this play game button is just going to be a button which we need to import. So let me go here and just import the button. And here we can just make that button. Cool. Now here we can make that equal to a button, which we just imported from this file we have here. Make sure to export the button by saying return button. And in here we can pass in our values. So first it wants text. So here we can just say play game, because that's what it does. It tells you to play the game. I'm going to pass in nil, because we do not have a function or a function parameter we want to pass in. Then I'm going to pass in, let's say 50 and 50. We're going to position it nicely later. So it's going to be the X and the Y position of the button. Now down here, where we draw the game, and here it says game.state running. We want to add an else if, because else if the game.state is not running, but instead it is of menu, and this should just be in square brackets, not circular brackets. So else if the game state is in menu state, we want to go to buttons dot menu state dot play game, and we want to say :draw to call the draw function. And now in here we want to specify a bunch of things. So I wonder if yeah, there we go. So the button X position, you can go 10, the button Y position 20, and then we could just maybe say 10 and 20 like that, just as an example. Now it's not going to give us anything great. And was this really X and Y? What was this? This was, oh, the width and the height. So it's going to be 50 width, 50 height. And in here it's just going to draw it at position 10 and 20. And then the text is going to be at position 10 and 20 as well. But not the same 10 and 20 as this button, because we changed that. And I'll show you that in a second, because I know it's going to be confusing. And take note, this is still here, this if statement, because if the game state is not running, we just want the circle to be smaller. So the circle should be smaller in this menu state. And the circle should be smaller in this running state. Or it should be larger in this running state. Anyhow, let's go here. And here we go. So we have a button, not really the best. It's looking kind of small there. So let's just make the button a bit bigger. So I'm going to go here to the above where it's 50-50. And I'm going to maybe make it a bit longer, so 120, and maybe a bit shorter or a bit less tall, so 40. Now that does look much better. Okay, and then here we have a play game, and you'll notice it looks kind of weird. Now if I were to show you something interesting here, so what do we have here? We have the button X and Y position, so let's make this text X and Y position 5 and 5, just so I can show you what's happening, because this is kind of the part that may have been confusing to a lot of you. As you can see here, it's 5 from this left side and 5 from the top. Now, if we go back to button here, and we don't do this, we just say, okay, just make them what is passed in. That's all you have to do. Just make them what we pass in. Or actually, no, let's actually change this up. So we go like that, and we uncomment these. There we go. So if we just did this, I want to show what would have happened. So if we just said self.text X and self.text Y is what we pass in, then you can't see it, because the text is now 5 pixels from here and 5 pixels from the top. Not from the button width and height, but from the top. So that breaks a lot of things. So if we change the text color then instead. So here it's 0, 0, 0, 0. We can just make it 1, 1, 1, 1 then. All these finger pop-ups. There we go. 1. Then you'll see it's right there. Now, we don't want that, right? We don't want that. That is why we have this right here. This self.buttonX. So even if we don't pass in anything, it's going to be at the same location our button starts at. So for example, if I were to comment all of this back in again, and I were to not pass in a text X or Y, which will run this then it would look like this. As you can see, it's right there at the button, but not at the game. So that is why we did that. We don't want this to start here at the game. We always wanted to start at the button X and Y positions. Cool. Now let's make this maybe like a 17 and a 10. That should look good for right now. Yeah, that looks perfectly fine. Later on, we'll change the font a little bit to be a bit bigger and just match the button better. But for now, I think that's fine. So yeah, there's our first button, play game. Let's create 2 more buttons. And I'm going to just go here. Now this second button is optional, because I'm not going to code it. It's going to be your homework at some point. So settings. So there's going to be the settings button. And then we want an exit game button. And in this button, we'll say settings. And it's going to have the same width and height. And in this button right here will be exit game. Or just even exit if you want to. And then the same width and height. And because all of them are the same width and height, you could always make this the default width and height. Like here where we do this, you can make it the default here. That would actually be a good idea. Now we can code the exit button right now. We can give it its function. So love.event.quit, because this will quit love. So once the button is clicked, it will run this code. Or we haven't really implemented that, but that's what it should do. Take note, all of these are from the menu state because they will all be displayed once the menu state is true. Okay, now we can go down here again and we can draw the game. So let's go like this, and let's draw settings, and let's draw exit game. And let's see, how do they look? What do we see? Okay, we just see exit game because that's what's been drawn last. So we can just make them all go down a bit. We can leave the rest to be exactly the same. So we can say 70, and here we can maybe like 120. And that looks fine to me, at least. So now we have a play game, a setting, and an exit game. They don't do anything if you click on them, but now we have that. Now we want to go back to the button because we need to make some function that will allow us to press the button, to click the button. So we're just going to check if it's been pressed, and we'll do the press doing on the main, in the main file. So here we can just do something such as check pressed, right? And in this will be a function, and here we can just put a comma. Cool. Now this will take in a self, a mouse, X position, so where the mouse currently is at the X position, the mouse Y position, so where the mouse is currently at the Y position, and in the cursor radius. So if we ever change the cursor size, we don't have to worry about changing it here as well. So cursor radius. Cool. Now here we can just create a basic if statement. So if mouse, of the X position of the mouse plus the cursor radius is more or equal to self.button X. So let me actually draw that because I think this will become a little bit more difficult to understand. So let me just go like this. So we are saying, let me just make this a good, easily seeable color on white. So this is our cursor, right? And this is our button. I'm going to say B for button. Now, if I go here, you'll see the mouse X position. Okay, so the mouse X position. And remember, this is our mouse. That right there is our mouse. But remember, our mouse, if I can just make this red maybe, our mouse is here in the center. That is actually where our mouse is. That's where the point of our cursor is. You might have remembered from the first video, where when we drew this, you would have noticed the mouse cursor thing. It's like that. So that's our mouse. Right there. Now, we go back here. There we go. We say if the mouse X, okay, so this is X, remember? So that's X, and this is Y. So because remember, this can make a Y-ish shape. That's why this is Y. This is X. So if the mouse X position, let's go like that. So this is the mouse X, right? So boom. The mouse X position right there. Let's make that 32, for example. Right? Plus the cursor radius. So this part right here. This is the cursor radius. Because remember, a circle, whoa, not a good circle there. A circle has a radius. That right there, that's the radius of a circle. So take note, that term is very important. That's the radius. It's only half of the circle. So this right here. So this X plus the radius, and let's say this whole circle is 20, right? So the radius would then be 10, because if the whole circle from here to here if that whole circle is 20, and the radius is half of the circle, then it would be 10. That would be the radius. So 32 plus 10, that's 42. So we're saying if 42 is more or equal to the button X position, so let's say this button X position, which is obviously further than that circle, so that would be this button X position, which would be like this. This is the button X position. I should actually choose a different color at this point. Let's go maybe something like a bluish color. I hope everyone can see that. Yeah, nope, let's go like that. Okay, so this is the button X. The button X we can say is 62. This would then be false, because here we're saying if it's more or equal to, very important. It's not more or equal to 62. It's 42. It's less than 62. So if we move our cursor, so the cursor is, let's say, like this. So you'll notice the end of the cursor is inside of the button. This would then, remember that's the radius, right? And this is 32. And let's say, I don't know, this right here, that part right there. So from this point right here to this part right here is, let's say, 45. Because remember, there's not like a lot there. So that's just 45. So 45. Then we can just add the radius to it to get back to the middle. That would be 10, so we can make that 55. Right? Now we can add the radius again, because we're at the center. Or we could have just added this full 20. That would have worked well. But if we add the radius again, we'll get 65. So remember, this right here, that's 45. This whole length here, that's 45. Because that's just what number we made up at this point. And then we add 20 to get from this point of the circle to this point. Or 2 10s to get 2 radiuses. Because 2 radiuses makes one of the circle. Because a radius is half of the circle. Very important to know. And then we get 65. 65 is more than 62. Thus, we are pressing the button. We are now pressing the button. That is what all of this math does. If most of this math went over your head, don't worry too much about it. You can kind of figure it out on your own as you play with this. But basically, if a part of the circle, no matter how big the part, but if a part of this circle we have goes over the button, this right here, that's the button, then we should say it's clicked. So that this is just for the X, right? Simple as that. Now we also need to do it the other way around. So if we go back here and let's actually, can we create a new, no, I don't know how to create a new one. Control N doesn't work. Okay, that's fine. Let's say we have this is our circle and this is our button. So this is button. Now we need to do the same thing, but if the circle does this. So we need to do the same thing, because we need to take note. We should not press this button. We should not be able to press it if our circle is here and the button is here. Or if our button is here and the circle is here. We should only press the button when the circle is basically on the button. A part of the circle should be on the button. But if a part of the circle is not on the button, no matter if it's to the left or to the right, we should not click that button. Only if a part of that circle is on the button should we click the button. And oh, okay, it did make more. Okay, good to know. Good to know. So now we need to do the same, but the other way around. So I'm going to just put that inside of brackets to make it easier to read. And I'm going to say and. Start another pair of brackets and just paste that in here. Now we want to minus the cursor radius here. And we want to say, instead of more than or equal to, we can say less than or equal to. And I recommend, if you kind of struggle viewing what we're doing right now, if you're kind of struggling seeing what's happening, draw it out. drawing out math is probably the best thing you can do, because that's what we just did. And if that helped you to understand at least the first part, then that means if you draw it out for yourself, then you will be able to understand the second part as well. And then here we can just add with, so plus with. Self.width, that is. Now this self.width, remember, refers to the width of the button. So let me actually draw this again. Should draw. So here we're saying, if the mouse X, so here's the mouse. Let's do this. Mouse X, right there. That's where the mouse X is. So let's say X is equal to 32, right? If that is less than or equal to this button X, right? So this button X right here, it starts there. That's where the button X starts, right there. Plus the button width. So it's going to be plus the button width. So this is where it's going to be. This dot right there, that side, that corner. If it is less than that. And we're minusing the cursor radius because we want this point. So if this point is less than this side right here, then this X right there, if it's less, then we want to do something. So let's make this blue. So if this part right here is past this part, so if it's more than this X location, because remember, X is just a position, and this red part right here is below this red part right here, then we want to call the button. This can be very confusing, and I myself got confused here. But this math is very important to understand, because in all future games, this is how you can code a button. Anyhow, so I hope you understood this part. If you don't, you can still follow along without any problem, because believe me, I'm also trash when it comes to math. Cool, now we need to do the exact same thing, but we want to do it for Y. So here we can just change mouse X to mouse Y. Right? And then we can do the same here. Button X, but button Y. And instead of width, we want to say height. We still keep the cursor radius, because remember, it's just a circle. Meaning, if we go from the center of that circle, and we add the circle radius, whether it be left, right, or up or down, then we'll get the edge of that circle location on X or Y axis, depending on which we choose. So it should still have the cursor radius. So if it's more or equal to the self.button Y and mouse Y minus cursor radius is less than or equal to self.button Y plus self.x or self.height, then, and take note, we're using height with Y and width with X, because width is left to right, height is top to bottom, just like how Y is top to bottom and X is left to right. That's why we use those two respectively. Okay, now we know the button is inside, or the cursor is inside of the button. We know that for a fact now. So we can just start executing stuff. So self.funcParam. So if a function parameter exists, if one was passed in, right, then we want to call self.func, and we'll do pass in self.func parameter, like that. Else, we want to do the same thing, but this time we just don't want to pass in a parameter. So if a parameter was not passed in, we don't care about it. And just like that, we have implemented a press operation for our button. Alright. Whew. That was quite a long one to do. We are almost at the end though, so don't get discouraged just yet. Cool. Now I'm going to create a mouse pressed function. So whenever the mouse is pressed, now you can do that within draw, within update, within load. I'm going to create my own entire function for it, which is possible with Love2D. I didn't do this in the tutorial because I kind of wanted to keep it for this tutorial. So if you don't notice this from the tutorials I had, don't worry, I did skip it for a reason. So we can just say function love.mouse pressed, and I find this to be a lot more powerful than the one we had in the tutorial. And you can just say x, y, button is touch presses. So all of these gets passed in for us. We get the X position of our cursor, the Y position of the cursor, where the right button was clicked, the left mouse button was clicked, or the middle mouse button was clicked. I think there's probably support for other mouse buttons, like the ones you get on the side of some mouses and stuff like that. I just don't know how to work with them. And then we have is touch, so basically, is it a touchscreen? You know, so touchscreen mobile support. So is touch, and then presses, so how many presses, I believe. So basically if they touched with their finger, and here's how many times they touched, or how many times they clicked or whatnot. We are not going to implement touchscreen support in this game, because I think that's, I don't know, I just think that's something you could probably do if you wanted to, but it's quite a lot of debugging, especially if you don't have a touchscreen yourself. Anyhow, we can then just say if not game.state is running, because remember, we don't really want the mouse to be able to click anything if the game state is running. The mouse buttons shouldn't do anything while the game is running. Then, so if the game is not running, then you're allowed to do anything in here. We can say if button is equal to 1, meaning if we pressed the left mouse button, so not the button that brings up this one, but the other button, the one if I click like this. If we click this button, then do something. So if game.state, so if it's the menu state, we want to specifically use the menu buttons. Then you go for index, and we don't need a value, and we can just say buttons.menu state. So we're going to loop for all of the buttons in the menu state. That's why we created it here, because we're going to loop for all of these buttons inside here to check if they have been pressed. That's why it's in the menu state, so only if it's the menu state. This is also to save a little bit of performance. We're going to say buttons.menu state dot, or not dot, we can just say position index. So that should be a dot. So buttons.menu state at this index. So let's say the play game button, for example. And then we want to just say check pressed for that button. And we want to pass in the X, the Y. And the X and Y is basically the cursor X and Y that we're passing in. And in the player dot radius. And the player radius is coming from here. There we go. The player radius, which in this case is actually 20. So yeah, that's the radius. It's half of the whole circle. Anyhow, so we pass that. So it's going to check if any of those buttons were pressed. So if I were to now run this, and let's try X again, because that's currently the only button that has anything implemented. And we actually get an error, but it worked. So button.lua at 17. Okay, so button lua at 17. Attempt to perform algorithmic on field height, a null value. So let's see here. Height, self.height, which is a null value. Oh, probably just spelled it incorrectly. There we go. Actually, I think height might be spelled incorrectly. I don't know. I can't grammar for the life of me. Now let's try it again. And it worked. Our game exited without any problem. Cool. Now let's quickly work on the start new game function, and then we're done. then we can turn it off for today. So I like to do that underneath. I don't know. Actually, I think I'll do it above load. And maybe I'll even put this mouse pressed right here. I'll put it above load as well. Why not? And we can just do that. Boom. Okay. Now here I'm going to create a local function, and I'm going to say start new game, right? And then it doesn't take in anything, we can just say start new game. Then game.state at menu, whoa, whoops, my bad. Yeah, at menu, right, then becomes false. So we're setting the menu state equal to false. And currently, because we only have the menu and the running state, we're not going to worry too much about the other states. But now we can set this running state equal to true, because we're starting a new game, so we should start running the game. And in here, we can also just create our first enemy as well. So this part right here, we can completely remove it and just move it up. So now here, we can just boom, like that. Now whenever start new game is pressed, we're going to insert a new enemy into our game, and we're going to set the menu state to false and then the running state to true. Okay, now let's actually just implement that here. So where it says nil, we can say start new game without the parentheses. Take notice, without the parentheses, because otherwise it's just going to execute before it gets passed in. And yeah, then one last thing. This is going to become more helpful later in the game, but we can just say if game dot state is running. So if the game state is running, then we want to do this. This is so the enemies don't try and keep chasing the player if the player is like in the menu or the game is paused or anything like that. Because believe me, it's going to be very funny, but the player isn't going to like that. That they can still lose while in the menu or something like that. Anyhow, so we just say they're only allowed to move if the player or if the game state is running. Cool, now let's try and play game. As you can see, not only does our player grow, but the enemies now start following us as well. That's pretty neat. So we did quite a lot in this tutorial. Well done if you're still following along. So basically, we created our first buttons. We implemented touch for those buttons. We implemented the drawing the buttons. And then we implemented the actual functions of the buttons. And that's that. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. And I'll see you all again in the next Love2D tutorial.